I love Eriugena, as you know. And
Yep.
in his homily, The Voice of the Eagle, for those of you who don't know, Eriugena is one of Celtic Christianity's best and most beloved philosophers and theologians. He's a lot like Meister Eckhart, except being Celtic, if that helps you. And he has this homily called The Voice of the Eagle, which is all about the prologue to John's Gospel. And in it, he uses John as the example of the contemplative life and Peter as the example of the active life, much in the same way that Mary and Martha get used.
Yep.
And he
And
uses
John Philip Newell talks about this too, I think, in his Listening for the Heartbeat of God. That's the idea of these two very different things, with John representing the contemplative.
Yeah, and then I was reading the entry in the Golden Legend. I noticed that the author makes this little note, which makes more sense now that you were talking about how they were trying to. It was very much a sort of heresy and political grab kind of thing. But the author says, some people think that Mary Magdalene and John the Apostle were married, but that's heresy, and we can't ever believe that. But I find that concept that they would be married, since they're both the examples of the contemplative life, sort of more in an archetypal than in a historical way. I find that to be really fascinating.
Yeah.
And do you know what sources say that they were married, or where that comes from?
There are several oral traditions where that has flourished, and that has definitely been there. And in fact, they're partly drawing on the Golden Legend. There is a tradition of artwork that you can often see of Jesus at the wedding at Cana. And one of the variants, and there's so many variants to this then, so one of the variants that was told about this is the wedding at Cana was supposed to be the wedding between Mary Magdalene and John the disciple. And Jesus calls John to become his disciple, and he renounces the life of marriage in order to become a celibate, leaving Mary Magdalene brokenhearted and destitute. And so she goes off and becomes a prostitute. So there's that version as well. So we have that one. This is one of these great puzzle pieces, because we also have many scholars, more and more, who are coming up from, every place from UC Berkeley to the Netherlands, some biblical scholars who are saying that they think that Mary Magdalene may have been the author of the Gospel of John. So there's another whole legend that, how in the Catholic Church, in the Roman Church, when a nun became a monk, she took on a man's name. So we have, so many of these Sister Francis or Sister John, or for hundreds of years. And there was this tradition that when women gave themselves to a life of contemplation and became vowed nuns, vowed monastics, that they lost their femininity. And this has got this interesting parallel in Gospel of Thomas, because at the end of that, the last Logion, which is so controversial, where Peter says, "Make Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of the life." And Jesus says, "I myself shall lead her to become anthropos," which, by the way, everyone, means fully human, but it was translated as, "I shall lead her to become fully male." So there was this other variant that said that when women cut off, and I think we have this in some of the ideas of the early Christian martyrs too, where in renouncing marriage and renouncing the traditional pathway of the female, that they were somehow making themselves male, that they were elevating, again, this is a denigration of the feminine, but they were no longer subjected to the problems of being female by elevating themselves to being ever virgin. But in doing this, then they would take on a male name. So there's these different currents that suggest that the Gospel of John, that John was actually a name that Mary Magdalene took on to write the gospel under, and so that it can go to that. Now, the whole idea of who John is like, it's the fascinating whodunit, right? I think Rudolf Steiner said it's Lazarus, and it's an interesting thing. But there are many different traditions within France, some of them radically opposed to one another, by the way, who still claim that the source material of Gospel of John is Mary Magdalene. So that becomes interesting too. Okay, did we, from her being the authoress of that, she becomes the jilted bride of. So again, her own spiritual authority diminished potentially.
Well, that is all very interesting, and I'm going to read 100 things about that if I can.
Yeah.
but should we maybe wrap it up? I feel like now's a good time to wrap up. Thank you so much for all of that wonderful wisdom.
And I hope that everyone just gets curious, because as I said, this is a huge puzzle piece, and I honestly believe that it's going to take all of us to gather the different pieces and see which ones fit together to give us a much truer picture of who this amazing, courageous first disciple was. Thanks, Justin.